Just come in front. Good. Let's give it another 2 minutes and then we'll start. Thanks. Rushing from another event. But for the sake of time, I think we can start and then they can join us a little later. If that's okay with the governor?
Do you want to wait? I could go to my office and give you time.
I think we can.
It's your call. It's your call.
We can start. Good. Kevin, are we ready? Good. Good morning once again and welcome to our monetary policy announcement. the second of the year. As usual, the governor will come and present the decision of the Monetary Policy Committee of the bank. The committee met yesterday and deliberated on economic developments here at home, globally, and they will then, or they arrived at a particular decision that the governor will inform us about, and then he will explain those reasons. And as usual, we will welcome questions and answers from you, our media representatives this morning. As usual, you can state your name, the organization that you represent, and then we can have a very insightful discussion. With those few words, let me now invite the Governor of the Bank of Namibia, Mr. Johannes Kavahap, to deliver the monetary policy announcement. Governor, the floor is yours.
Good morning and welcome to the statement. We had our meeting yesterday, the 13th of April. We have reviewed global, regional, and domestic economic and financial developments. And the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Namibia has decided to keep the repo rate unchanged at 3.75%. The MPC is of the view that the rate remains appropriate to continue supporting domestic economic activity, while at the same time safeguarding the one-to-one link between the Namibia dollar and the South African rand. Let's look at the recent developments that inform the decision. The first one is around the global economic developments. The global economy recorded an improved quarter-on-quarter growth in the last 3 months of 2020. Inflation rates in most advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies increased. Monetary policy stances of key monitored economies were generally accommodative. Global economic activity recovered somewhat in the fourth quarter of 2020 compared to the previous quarter. The recovery was stronger in both the advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies, supported by strong fiscal stimuli, improved industrial production, as well as increased economic activity. The recovery was mainly on the back of positive sentiment regarding the progress of vaccine production and its deployment in many countries. In addition, the impact of COVID-19 containment measures was less severe on economies that had adopted better public health measures and income support. Going forward, the International Monetary Fund, in its April 2021 World Economic Outlook update, has projected the global economy to grow by 6% in 2021 before moderating to 4.4% in 2022. This is an upward revision by 0.5 percentage point and 0.2 percentage point for 2021 and 2022. The improved growth is mainly attributed to the potential positive effect of COVID-19 vaccines on economic activity around the globe by the second half of 2021. Advanced economies' economic activity improved quarter on quarter during the last 3 months of 2020, mainly due to the further easing of lockdown restrictions and policy support. Similarly, economic activity in most of the monitored emerging markets and developing economies improved over the same period. The economy in China returned to its pre-pandemic annual growth rate, while India emerged from negative growth territory during the last quarter of 2020. Going forward, the IMF projects the advanced economies to grow by 5.1% in 2021 and 3.6% in 2022, while a 6.7% and 5% expansion is projected in the emerging markets and developing economies in these 2 years, respectively. The positive prospects are on the back of lifting economic lockdown measures and positive sentiment regarding the successful rollout of COVID-19 vaccines globally. Key risks to the global economic outlook include the degree of success in the deployment of COVID-19 vaccines, as well as geopolitical tensions. All monitored commodity prices increased since the last MPC meeting, except gold. The increase in commodity prices was mainly due to demand-side factors such as the rebounding manufacturing activity and fiscal stimuli globally. Stock markets continued to improve in March and April 2021 amid steady bond yields and a strong economic recovery outlook. The good performance was mainly attributed to wide-scale rollouts of COVID-19 vaccines and indications that the global economy was on the path to recovery. Moreover, the positive trends are also due to the lowest interest rate environment, complemented by asset purchase programs of key central banks that are encouraging investment in riskier assets such as equities. The rates of inflation, though still well contained, increased in recent months in most of the key monitored economies. Notably, inflation increased in the US, in the Euro area, Brazil, Russia and India, while it moderated in the UK and South Africa. China and Japan, on the other hand, experienced deflation in February 2021. Most monitored central banks left their policy rates unchanged while continuing to implement supportive, non-conventional policy measures. The central banks of Brazil and Russia, however, raised the policy rates in February and March 2021, respectively, due to rising inflation. Regardless, the monetary policy of all monitored central banks remained accommodative. Let's look at what's happened in our country. Domestic economic activity contracted substantially in 2020 relative to 2019 and remains weak year to date. The rate of inflation increased during the first 2 months of 2021, while growth in private sector credit extension remained subdued. The stock of international reserves remained sufficient to support the currency peg. Domestic economic activity contracted severely by 8% in 2020 compared to a contraction of 0.6% in 2019. Contractions were observed in key sectors such as tourism, transport, mining, agriculture, manufacturing, construction, wholesale and retail, as well as the public sector. The contraction was mainly due to the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the sharpest declines in output recorded in the tourism and transport sectors. On the contrary, activity in the electricity and water, as well as information and communication sectors, recorded positive growth during the same period. Recent developments in the domestic economy also pointed to subdued activity in most economic sectors during the first 2 months of 2021 compared to the same period of 2020. Going forward, the domestic economy is expected to grow by 2.7% in 2021. The successful procurement and rollout of COVID-19 vaccination in Namibia will be critical for the extent and speed of the economic recovery in our country. Annual average inflation increased to 2.7% during the first 2 months of 2021 compared to 2.3% for the corresponding months in the previous year. The increase in inflation was mainly reflected in the food and beverages categories during the period under review. On a monthly basis, overall inflation stood at 2.7% in February 2021, the same as the previous month. Overall inflation is projected to average around 3.2% for 2021. Domestic demand remains subdued as evidenced by slow growth in private sector credit extension, which averaged 2% during the first 2 months of 2021. This growth is much lower than the 6.7% recorded during the same period in 2020. Since the last MPC meeting, year-on-year growth in private sector credit extension remained almost unchanged at 2.1% at the end of February 2021 from 2% at the end of December 2020. As at the 31st of March 2021, the stock of international reserves stood at 34.7 billion Namibian dollar compared to 34.4 billion Namibian dollar reported in the February 2021 MPC statement. The decrease in reserves was mainly due to an inflow resulting from diamond sales, which was partly offset by the appreciation of the Namibian dollar against the US dollar. The 34.7 billion Namibia dollar of international reserves is estimated to cover 5.4 months of imports. At this level, the reserves remain sufficient to protect the peg of the Namibia dollar to the South African rand while meeting the country's international financial obligations. The MPC also noted the increase in international reserves in early April 2021 to 38.7 billion Namibian dollars, resulting from the disbursement of the IMF Rapid Financing Instrument and SACU receipts. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. My name is Kevin. I wait for A11. Just maybe some clarity. Maybe I'm a little bit clouded. When you started talking about the international reserves, you say as at the 31st of March 2021, the stock of international reserves stood at 34.7 billion compared to 34.4 billion reported in the February 2021 MPC statement. You say the decrease. Is that a decrease or is it an increase there? If you can just highlight for me. And also secondly, looking at the fact that you are pointing to the expeditious rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines in the country as translating to possible economic growth, are you quite concerned about the fact that we haven't yet received our vaccines from where we bought those ones? And secondly, looking at the sectors there, maybe your views about the locust invasion that we are being told right now, Karasbek, Arwab, Kois, we are being told of Ohangwen and other parts of the country. Are you quite concerned there that these could also reverse gains that we had made in the agricultural sector, looking at the rains? And are you also concerned about the fact that the Agriculture Ministry is saying that it is facing a difficulty right now because to procure those pesticides from the manufacturers, they need to have an order, a certain amount of request that's supposed to be substantially big enough. And one country making a small order, the manufacturers won't be in a position to provide that. That information was provided to us by PS Musika. And they are saying that we need Zimbabwe and Angola to also come in so that we can have a procurement request that is substantially big enough for the manufacturers to give us those. Your concerns around that?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kaipa Herukanji. I report for NBC TV. Mine is on the new budget, the 2021-2022 budget. It's a public secret that we have had negative contraction since 2016, obviously exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. There's also been criticism about the allocations to productive sectors of the economy, particularly agriculture. What is your stance on this? Is this budget pro-growth, or perhaps just, is it pro-growth or not? Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Stephen from Commerce and Industry Review. My question is on the maintaining of the repo rate in order to stimulate economic activities. Apart from maintaining the repo rate every now and then, what else can be done in order to activate economic activity in the country? Thank you.
Right, let me take those and start with the first questions on Kevin of ECLF. And so Kevin, that says at the end of March 2021, the reserve stood at 34.7 billion compared to 34.4 billion. So in the next sentence explaining the decrease in reserves was mainly due to an inflow resulting from diamond sales, which was partly offset by the appreciation in the currency. So the confirmation that you're looking for is yes, there's some marginal slight decrease from 34.7 to 34.4. But then we are also saying, if you go to the same paragraph, we've noted the MPC that at early April 2021, the reserve stood at 38.7 billion due to SACU receipts and the rapid financing instrument from the IMF. So that probably answers your first question. The second one is around the vaccine. We'd like to believe, as the Bank of Namibia, that procurement and successful rollout is fundamental to economic recovery. So what we need to do is to make sure that we procure the vaccines and that we deploy it successfully. The extent of our recovery and the speed at which our economy will recover depends on how quickly we procure and how quickly we deploy. So that's on the vaccine and its deployment. As far as the locus is concerned, I'm not very close to that, Calvin, to really get a view. I'm not so sure what the question is. I can give you a view about the economy in general, but in terms of containing locust, I'm not so close to that. So I'll disappoint you with an answer around that. To Gabriel, the new budget, we had negative growth since 2016, and there's criticism, is it pro-growth? Given the fiscal space that's available to our government, I think the minister has done an excellent job in terms of his allocations and how he juggled. If you look at how he's planning to deal with his deficit from around 8% to a 5.5% over the medium-term framework, we are on a consolidation path without trying to stifle and kill growth. So given the availability and the flexibility, to him, the minister has done an excellent job in terms of balancing the budget. As far as Stephen is concerned, apart from the repo rate, what else can be done? So Stephen, we have been talking about, last time, if you have been here in this room, we said, how does one grow an economy? And we said, the government needs to spend, we need some consumption spending from the households, we need to have more exports in our economy, and we need investments. And one of the levers we need to pull hard at this point is we need to make sure that we get investments in our economy. We need local investors to invest in the economy, and we need to attract foreign direct investors to come and invest in the economy. We cannot do this on our own. We also need to make sure that we guard against further economic scarring so that we don't aggravate and deepen poverty and inequality. Because what the pandemic has done is quite devastating, and we need to guard against that. So to answer the question, we need investments in the economy. We need more locals and more international investors to come into the economy.
Is that a follow-up to your earlier question?
I think that was enough. I don't think I wasn't understood there. I don't think the governor also answered
All right,
his question.
okay, just a moment. Just a moment. Is there anybody else? All right. So just after Calvin, just go to the mic, please. And Mr. Kanji can speak on his behalf, right?
Oh, that's right, yeah, because Mr. Kanji's question and my question, actually, they are almost similar, because we are speaking to a sector. And Honorable Governor, we are not asking you about how to control pests. Definitely that's not your area of competence. We are asking about your concern, because we are dealing with livelihoods. We are dealing with a particular sector equally important to this economy. Are you concerned about the fact that the Minister of Agriculture cannot adequately and expeditiously respond to what has been considered a crisis now by the agricultural community? Do you think and do you see a potential of a reversal of gains in terms of the agricultural sector? And this is also tying in to the budget allocation that was made to the agricultural ministry. Is it enough?
Yeah. So the question that you are asking is quite valid. Agriculture employs about 70% of the total population, so it's quite an important sector, but its contribution to gross domestic product is not what it should be. So if the question is being asked, are we concerned about locust outbreak and the adverse impact thereof on the economy? Of course we are, because it's going to impact on, if we say it employs 70% of our population, and if we say that it plays a key role in terms of helping us to grow the economy, and we've got locust, and you are saying we cannot control that, the part that I've said, I'm not so close is, the part that I've said is, I'm not so sure whether we are unable to control that. But if you say that we are unable to control that, clearly it must be a concern. Because what we need is agricultural sector, it's been suffering from effects of drought. If you look at what's happening with cattle marketed, and it was dwindled over the past 4 years, if you look at what's happening in the crop production, there are some green shoots in terms of what's happening with grape. It's, some encouraging, promising signs as to what's happening with dates and grapes. On the crop production side, there are some positive developments. But if you say we are unable to contain that, clearly it is a concern.
Madam?
Gabriel can come back if he wants to follow up clearly.
Yes, Mr. Governor, my question is in relation to profit that banks have continued to report. That is, well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Kanje from the Windhoek Observer. My question is, what is your view on the super profits that banks continue to report? If you look at the bank's financial, you realize that most of the money is coming from other incomes that is not from your core business, which is supposed to be your net interest income. Banks' net is also making more money from other incomes, which means that it's from charges. Is that how it's supposed to be? Is that supposed to be allowed? That banks keep making money from other charges? Does that not show that banks are overcharging people? Because how can one declare a profit of $1 billion if in this economy and a small country as such? Is that not a cause of concern for you as governor?
Right, Israel, with your permission, let me try and give you, because I'm getting quite a lot of questions on the banks, let me try and give you an overview of the banking system in the country before I get to, I didn't get your name. Kanji. Right, let me try and talk to you about health of the banking institutions. I'm going to talk about the liquidity of banks. I'm going to talk about the profitability of banks. I'm going to talk about the quality of assets and non-performing loans. And I'm going to give you an answer about, some people are asking, the banks are investing heavily in government bonds and treasuries. Should we be worried about that? Because the exposure to the sovereign is getting out of hand, according to some people. Let me try and talk to all those five, and then I'll get to your points, whether the profits the banks are making is reasonable, is it fair, or is it not fair? Right, if you look at the health of the banks, banks are well capitalized in Namibia. Based on the latest December 2020 returns, the statutory capital ratio of banks stood at 15.2%, at a level of about 16.3 billion Namibian dollars. This implies that banks have excess capital of about 5.6 billion Namibian dollars of what is required by the Bank of Namibia as a minimum. The ratio has declined from 15.6% at the end of December 2019, but has stabilized, and there are no signs of further deterioration. So at the end of December 2020, it was 15.2. At the end of December 29, it was 15.6. But it has basically stabilized, and there are no signs that it's worsening. That's on the health of the banking institutions. As far as the liquidity is concerned, banks are holding liquid assets while in excess of the statutory requirements. The liquidity position of the Namibian banks remain quite comfortable. According to the latest statutory return of February 2021, the liquid asset ratio is currently at 15.5%, which is lower than the average of 15.8 and 16.2 for 2020 and 2019, respectively. That implies that banks are holding 55% more liquid assets than what is legally required as a minimum. This amounts to about 6.9 billion Namibian dollars, which banks could use as collateral to borrow from the Bank of Namibia at the various repo windows. So that's on the liquidity. Let's talk about the profitability of the banks. The banks remain profitable. The effective qualifying capital base remains stable. Yes, COVID-19 affected profitability of the banks, but what currently in our country is not being affected by COVID-19. So even the profitability of the banks have been hit. What we did is we look at the past 5-year period up till December 2019 to see what's happening with the provision and write-offs. And what we have seen is over the 5-year period up to December 2019, provision and write-offs represented about 10% of total income before tax and provisions of our banks. For 2020, this ratio increased to 36%. It's quite a big one. However, we have seen an improvement over the last 3 months to February 2020, where this ratio has dropped again to 15, and because it increased to 36%, we watched that. What happened at the end of February, it has really come down to 11%. So that is generally, if you look at the profitability of the banks, it's been affected. Is it fair for the banks to make more money from non-interest income? You know, it's probably more market forces and competitive forces. We had done a study at the Bank of Namibia on the fees. And Israel, you probably need to issue this. Every MPC, I'm getting questions about fees and charges. Please share that information about the study that we have done on the fees of banks, local banks, and what our views are around that. Because every time we answer the same question, and hopefully you'll get that. Let's look at the quality of assets of banks. That's in terms of non-performing loans. At the end of December 2020, non-performing loans, which are loans in arrears in excess of 90 days, as a percentage of total loans and advances, stood at 6.4%, compared to less than 3% in 2018 and about 4.8% at the end of 2019. So there is a clear worsening because of the pandemic, because many people lost their jobs, many people went out and asked for payment holidays. So as you'll know, one of the things the Bank of Namibia did was we asked the banks to provide some relief to customers. So since we started in April 2020, the banks received applications of 120,000 individuals and businesses applied for relief holidays in terms of the payments they have got to the banks. From that 120,000, about 115,000 loans were approved. If you look at the loans in terms of value, at the end of December 2020, that was about 10.3 billion. At the end of February this year, it was 10.1 billion. So it's a reduction from about 10.3 billion to 10.1 billion. And who were the key beneficiaries? It's individual households, it's those small businesses in the tourism sector, those in the trade and accommodation, real estate and mining. So had we not intervened as a Bank of Namibia, the consequences would have been disastrous. We'd like to believe that we have been very effective in supporting individuals and households to deal with the consequences of this pandemic. At the same time, we have not compromised the health of the banking system. Let's look at finally then on the other one that I've referred to, that was around to what extent are banks exposed to the sovereign? Are the banks really taking up government bonds and treasuries to the extent that we should be worried as a country? So what we did is we've done some exercise to see, if you look at domestic debt, if you look at government debt, it's about 77 billion Namibian dollars, right? Give and take. Some people will tell you exact number is 76.9. So if I round it off, I'll get to about 77 billion Namibian dollars. What's the exposure of banks? We look at in February 2019, the exposure of commercial banks to domestic debt of government was about 26.5%. In February 2020, that number was 26%. And in February 2021, that number dropped to 21.6%. And that sharp drop is because of the increase in debt denominator. That's why it has dropped from about 26 in February 20 to February 2021. But if you also take the money market exposure, so if you look at money market unit trust and add that and said, what's the underlying investments that money market unit trusts have got in government bonds and in treasury bills in particular, instruments that are less than 12 months. So if you look at that, February 2019, that was about 8.5% to domestic debt from money market unit trust. In February 2020, it was 7.5%. And you had a significant increase to February 2021 to about 16.5%. And that 16.5 increase is a big one from 7.5 last year to this year. And that's an indication of market forces at play. Some entities with money seem to be happy because of uncertainties and because of the pandemic that we have got to invest in treasury bills, money market instruments, and earn less than 4%. So that's probably at a very high level. You know, it took a little bit longer than I should, but you know, that probably deals with your question. Okay.
Mr. Governor, my question again is on the banks. Looking at, we talk of financial flows outside the country. And I think banks are one of the institutions or one of the vehicles through which we have a lot of financial flows out of the country. Every interest, every profit that the bank makes in the country goes outside the country. Because most of our big banks are not local banks. As a government advisor, do you think it's still feasible and sensible that the country does not have its own national bank, a government bank, that supports growth in the country and supports business, actually supports real business in the country, not what we have at the present? And then, okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Unless I'll add on it later. Thank you.
That's the last round of questions. We're not going to open the other one. So let's make use of this opportunity.
Yes, maybe just out of interest, both personally and professionally, you alluded to the fact of the non-performing loans, pointing to a crisis, the 6.4% of total loans advanced to households and individuals being in arrears. I know there was a figure sometime last year, not too sure if it was around 500 million or so, credit extended to individuals and households by the commercial banks. Is this at all a concern for you as the Bank of Namibia?
Right, so let's try with the first one. Are we worried about not having our own bank in the country? I think Bank Windhoek is a Namibian-owned bank, and we had some examples of local banks. If you go back as far back, we had a City Savings Bank, we had an SME bank, and we had some banks. So it's not a case that we don't have our own bank, and Bank Windhoek is all local ownership. And what we need to understand is the other three big banks, yes, they are South African owned, but most of the Namibian pension funds, through the asset managers, have acquired shares in these banks. So Namibian pension funds and Namibian pension fund members are shareholders through the asset managers in most of the banks. Are you advocating and promoting and said we need a local state-owned bank? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Okay. I think if any bank meets the requirements that the bank has got, the Bank of Namibia has got minimum requirements for anyone who wants to set up a bank. If the state wants to come and say, we want to set up a bank, and it meets with the requirements that we have got, if it is fit and proper, clearly, if it meets those requirements, it will get a license to set up a bank.
Can I just make an interjection? As a government advisor, would you advise the government, not for us to wait for somebody to come up with the idea, but would you advise the government to come up with a national bank, as opposed to the private interest having shares in this one, a directly government-owned bank?
To do what?
To carry out exactly that, the commercial activities as the other banks are doing. Would you give such an advice to the government?
I haven't really thought about that. So it totally depends on what exactly do you want to do with bank, though. Do you want to do what SME Bank has been doing? Do you want to support the small and medium? Do you want just transactions? Do you want something for the unbanked sector? What do you want to do? If you say set up a state-owned bank, because remember when you were here, I said my observation about the banking sector in Namibia is we've got a very stable, modern banking sector, but the banking sector serves the formal economy and the urban areas quite well. The banking sector has quite a lot of work to do to serve the informal economy, to serve the rural areas. So if you say, would you advise the government to set up a state bank to serve the unbanked? That's a very valid argument. Then you need to think about, do we need to do bricks and mortar, or do you probably need to go a fintech type of route, use the technology to do that? But if you say set up a state-owned bank just to have, for the sake of having transactions, I'm not so sure whether that's a good one. If you say set up a bank to assess SME sector, I'll probably say you have got the SME bank or you have got the DBN to play that role. So it totally depends on what do you want the state bank to do. So if people come to us and say, let's set up a state bank to make sure that we reach out to the unbanked, to the informal, to the rural areas, they are totally unbanked and we need to give them access and it's financial inclusion. That's a very valid argument and we should look at doing that. But if the question is just merely just to have a bank for the sake of having a commercial bank, it's not easy to compete against incumbents. So if you have got a niche that you want to go and exploit, that's probably going to work. So the other one is around the NPLs. The NPLs have reached about 6.4%. Are we worried about that? I said to you last time, NPLs were in March last year, 5.2%. In June, it went to 5.7%. In September, it went to 6.5%. And in December, it went to about 6.4. So between September, it's 6.5 and 6.4. It's stabilizing. So what we have done is we look at the first 2 months of this year, and it looks as if it is stabilizing. You can follow up if there's a follow-up up to that. So remember what we had in terms of, I quoted that a number for you. In 2018, non-performing loans were about 3%, or below 3%. In 2019, it was about 4.8%. Because of COVID, what we did is we have moved the buffer to about 6%. And it was 5.2, 5.7, 6.5. So clearly we were very worried. So we started monitoring that very closely. So it's stabilizing at 6.4. But the first 2 months of this year, we look at that and it stabilized at around 6.4. So we'll get the numbers at the end of March to see actually what the latest is. But it would seem to us if it is stabilizing. You've got a final question.
Mr. Governor, I'm not sure if this example is going to clarify my question a little bit more, or if it's going to be covered in the fee, in the form that is supposed to share of the bank fees. But if I was to deposit $1,000, for example, into my bank account, eventually when I go back and look at it, it will be $140. That's a whole $60 to bank charges. Does that not show that banks are overcharging people?
Florette, you want to answer this? So I'm getting really a question around fee bank charges every MPC. So what we need to really do is to share that information around bank fees. So what we need to do is make sure the fees are fair, the fees are reasonable on the one hand, and on the other hand, we need to ensure the financial stability of the system. As the Bank of Namibia, we cannot go and prescribe, yes, we have got basic fees that you need to charge, and as part of that exercise, we told them you need to disclose your fees. So now if you withdraw money from an ATM, you get a notice that that's so much for that withdrawal. So it's your choice. Do you really want to continue on that basis? Do you want to go and try an electronic platform, or do you want to try another service provider? As a Bank of Namibia, we did the study, and we have issued some directives and guidance about fees. But we need to be very careful that we don't go and tell the banks, thou shalt charge the following fees, because if that happens, and we've got issues with financial stability in the country that we are trying to promote and maintain, we're probably going to be in difficult and hot water.
Thanks so much, Governor. Kanjay, we will get that information to you. I think Philemon had sent you an earlier report, but we'll try and sanitize the information once again and send it back to you. I'm sure this month we are having a financial stability report launch. So some of these questions that you may have that are not monetary policy related per se, but looking at the financial system itself and the stability thereof, you can come and post those questions there as well. Also next week, we are having the Namibia Deposit Guarantee Authority launch. There also is another opportunity for you to ask those related questions around the stability of the system. With that, thank you so much for a riveting and insightful discussion. You kept the governor on his toes. We look forward to another insightful discussion on the 15th of June for another monetary policy announcement. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.